Judith Starkston has spent too much time reading about and exploring the remains of the ancient worlds of the Greeks and Hittites. Early on, she went so far as to get 2 degrees in classics from the University of California, Santa Cruz and Cornell. She loves myths and telling stories. She has 2 grown children and lives in Arizona with her husband. Because writing is best done with community, Judith belongs to her local Desert Sleuths chapter of Sisters in Crime, the Society of Southwestern Authors, and the Arizona chapter of the Historical Novel Society. Judith Starkston, welcome to the Games and Writers Show. Really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So you have 2 series set in the Bronze Age. What do you think it is about that era that grips your imagination?
It's kind of a combination. Partly the issues feel very modern, so they're battling with diplomacy and wars and interaction between men and women, and the dynamics of those things are very similar. And yet their framework, their way of seeing those issues is completely different than ours. So it's a fun way to have a completely fresh perspective on things that feel really familiar.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it does seem like things never change.
Yeah, and then somehow they're completely different.
Right.
The whole culture around it is really exotic and unusual. So from the point of view of world building, it's a blast. And yet I think people will feel the resonance with what they live. So.
Right. Awesome. So as I mentioned, you do have 2 series going. One is called the Tesha series. Am I pronouncing that correctly? And maybe could you tell us a little bit about that series?
I got started with this when I was doing the research for my original book, which was set in the Trojan War. I was looking at the question of, who the Trojans were and what this culture was. And as it turns out, it's an empire that got primarily forgotten in history. I mean, the archaeology never happened until the 20th century. So there's this very interesting Hittite empire. And amongst all of those rulers, there is a queen who ruled for decades. And, frankly, she'd be like Elizabeth I. Everybody would know her if she hadn't just happened to be in the wrong geography and got buried and nobody knows about her. So I thought, look at this woman. She is fascinating. She's really powerful. She's brilliant. She's crafty, but, full of these mystical visions. She's just a lot of she usurps a throne. I mean, like all the good stuff for stories. And nobody had done any fiction about her, certainly. Like the scholarship, just the boring, dry academic stuff was barely getting going when I, got going on her. And so she was just fun. So I thought, this woman has decades of rule. This is a series.
And the other is the Trojan Threads series. Can you fill us in on that one, if you don't mind?
Yeah. I taught for years and years Greek and Latin and literature and many years of teaching the Iliad. And in the great Trojan epic cycles, there is this woman who is at the center of it all, but who gets no voice. Like all the men are fighting over her, but no one asks her opinion or wants to know anything about her. So that book was my Hand of Fire is a book that gives Briseis's tells the war through her point of view. There actually have been a number of books since I wrote that. Most recently, Silence of the Girls. I mean, there are a lot of people who have decided since I did it that Briseis was the person to hear from. And I find it wonderful how differently each of us did that. And I'll return to Briseis. I'm actually going to have her travel to Cyprus. I mean, Troy is destroyed. That whole area it's the end of the Bronze Age, the beginning of the Iron Age. There's just incredible tumult. And she's moving to Cyprus, partly because I love Cyprus. It's a really cool place to travel to. And also because there's a lot of threads in her story that work that way. So,
awesome.
But I won't be writing her again for a bit. I'm on with Tesha for a good long stretch.
Okay. I'll look forward to that. When writing it, I should ask this. Your books blend history and myth quite a bit. What gave you the idea to experiment with that dynamic?
When I started, I was really focused on the history and if you're going to write about Greeks in this period, they think gods walk the earth. They talk about that. So that was historical in my head. I was thinking, this is history. Then when I started really going with the Hittites, and it turns out the Trojans are kind of a vassal state of the Hittites, so that started with the first book. They believe in so much, which we would call magic. They called it religious belief or fundamental truths. And their medicine is magical. Their family therapy is magical. I mean, like everything from all levels. Their rule, how you conquer another people involves magic. So at a certain point, I said, guys, you just get to do what you do. And I'm not going to rationalize this. And if you think you can curse somebody and make this happen, this is great storytelling. Let it be, So I just stopped interfering with my character.
Well, I think that's one mark of a good writer, or at least a true writer, who, when the story says one thing, you follow. You don't try to whip it into shape. So
don't argue with a good character.
Right. So when you are writing a series, how do you keep things fresh for your reader, and then also for yourself?
Let's see. Good question. Because once in a while, you're describing that Bronze Age building again, and, the stones are still ashlar cut stone. So partly it's threading that background information in little slivers, and only when the reader really wants to know that. It's driven by the character development, by the plot, not because I need to tell you a bunch of stuff because I did all this research, so you're going to get it stuck down your throat. That's bad writing. I avoid that. So, and the actions of the characters are coming out of their hearts and their needs and their goals and their problems. So that's always fresh, because that's as much variety as humankind. And so I think the world building stays freshest because, and partly this is a really interesting new piece of archaeology. There's more archaeological digs in Turkey now than probably anywhere else in the world today. So when I feel like I'm maybe recycling something and I want something new, I just go do a little bit more reading on what the latest season of archaeological digs brought out of the earth, and whoosh, I have a whole new stuff. So that's fun.
So you partly answered this question already, but speaking of research, now you have a background of this stuff,
yes,
and you do some reading, but there is any other kind of research you do, or how much do you do? Like, do you do it before you begin, or is it an ongoing thing when you just need to fill in gaps? How does that work for you?
Well, I do a lot. I did a lot of travel, and so I know when I talk about a palace or a gorge where there's a battle, for example, that I wrote that's takes a place in a gorge. There's a waterfall. All of that is geography that I remember walking through and being in. And Bronze Age ruins are pretty ruined. They're, you're lucky if you've got a meter or two of wall standing. So there's a lot of imagination that goes into that. But it helps to have been there, to have a sense of, the height. I mean, the current palace that I'm writing about is way up on this tall mountain, super steep cliffs dropping. And I was just there climbing that, like a few years ago. I know all about this place. right now I'm working with a cover artist, and I said, well, here are photographs of when I was there. None of these are useful for cover art because they're not great, that way. But here's what you're looking for. And she goes out and comes back with incredible backgrounds that are, just like that. So it's fun. You have to be there. I think that's certainly a joy of being an author. It gives me an excuse to travel, but also like a focus to travel that's incredibly fun. For example, my logo right now on my website is the actual seal of this historic woman that I write about, because when I went to this museum in Çorum, Turkey, the director came out because the woman I was traveling with is Turkish and she knew him, and he came out and we walked all through this museum together, and he said, now this is her seal, and I was the person who excavated this. And the moment that he took it out of the earth and brushed it off with a little, that moment was so exciting to him. And he said, I have these really precise line drawings of it. I will give them to you, the digital copies. You can use them. So how fun,
wow.
That's just cool. When I sign books, I have she, of course, would have a gold seal pressed into clay because they wrote on clay. But given that I got to make this work on paper, I have a rubber seal that I stamp books when I sign. So
wow, that is cool.
Sometimes dry and sometimes super exciting.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So you are a member of the Sisters in Crime. Do you write any crime yourself?
Both the Priestess and Ashana and the upcoming book, Sorcery in Alpara, that's not out yet, have murders.
Oh.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Murders in their plots.
Excellent.
So I do incorporate, I think that's fun. Whodunit is a really good driving force. So I include that in my plots.
I would just like to point out how you mentioned that there were murders in your books, and I started rubbing my hands together. Yay! So I'm not sure what that.
Yes, murders are always a good thing. If you can murder a few people, it will drive that plot forward. And I don't think I want to kill off all the people you love quite as much as George R.R. Martin does, but never fear. You should not trust me to keep anyone alive for too long.
So what are you working on right now? Maybe something that we can look forward to from you.
I'm hoping that either this, preferably this summer, maybe this fall, the second in this Tesha series will be out. I'm in the final edits on it. I haven't yet put it out to edit from outside editors. Mm-hmm. And I don't always have total control on that time frame. But and I'm excuse me, I've got allergies this time of year.
Oh, it is a bad year for it too. I know. I've been struggling with that myself. I saw a weather map, and they had the pollen, and it was just like the entire country was just covered in a yellow blanket. Essentially, It was just insane. So take your time; it's totally fine.
There's a layer of international conspiracy and a murder plot and family crisis. There's kind of a secret in this one that Tesha does not know about that she soon discovers, and that is that her new husband has a few concubines already situated in the palace. And you can imagine that creates for some problematic...
Yeah, that might create some tension.
Yeah. It does. And she's very young and maybe not as well prepared to cope with this as she might be. So,
what do you think over the years is one thing that has improved, that you've improved most about your writing?
I think getting the emotions right is really hard. And partly having them be dramatic enough without getting purple.
Yeah.
And partly really pulling yourself into I write really close third. So getting my reader inside the body of my point of view character. And I switch. I have 2 or 3 in this current book. I have 3 points of view. So really living inside that as a writer is, to me, one of the biggest challenges, so that you feel, you as a reader are just there. You're inside that body, that world, that room, that meal you taste, that, smells you get. And I think I'm getting better at that. That was something I totally didn't get at all when I started writing. I mean, I was just like, back here, and you need to be in here,
Yeah.
So I think I'm getting better at that.
Awesome. Well, how do you go about doing that? Or I should ask, what are some things you changed in order to get better at that? Any techniques that you could share?
Partly, it's always the careful, whenever you describe bodily functions, like, the thumping hearts or, churning stomachs, the temptation to cliche is, really to be avoided, but easily fallen into. Yeah. So I try really hard. I think one of the tricks is never do what comes to your head first. You get to that scene, and don't, whatever first comes out is never, it might just be a place marker for the first draft of that scene, but go back in and redo it so that it really does shock your reader into that emotion. Your reader needs to feel the same thing that your character is.
Gotcha. Yeah, because if it's the first thing that comes to you, there's a decent chance it's going to be the first thing that comes to the mind of the reader as well.
Yeah, this morning I watched in horror as from my fingertips on the keyboard came something about the, chilled fingers of fear or some nonsense. I'm like, take that out now.
Too funny.
So then what I did is why is she afraid? And I simply had her observing, very directly noticing those things. And I didn't need to tell you she's afraid because, there's a killer right here. She knows it, doesn't know who it is. They just did something really terrible to somebody she loves, and now they're after her. I don't need to tell you she's afraid, now you know.
So is it, for you when you're writing, is it more about plot or character?
Character is always fundamental. If you don't have a big arc of change, something that the reader cares about, people care about people. Readers care about people. So that has to be in place. And I do things to my characters, so I do care. But first you have to like them, and then the bad things have to.
Right. But
I also really enjoy a nice, multi-layered, complicated plot. Not one that confuses you, but I would characterize what I write in some ways as epic fantasy. I mean, it's got a lot of history in it, but these are empires. This is the Hittites versus the Egyptians. I don't call them that. It's the Hittians and the Agarians, but I leave those breadcrumbs. You should be able to figure out who in history is inspiring my fiction. I don't know if you're familiar with Guy Gabriel Kay, but I kind of use his model. He writes brilliant fantasy with a lot of history. So, for example, his Byzantium becomes Sarantium. Like, if you can't figure out the connection,
might be the wrong book for you.
Yeah, but you don't have to figure it out. I mean, you can just enjoy his fiction. But if you want to know your historical sourcing or inspiration, you can get it without any work.
Awesome.
So I kind of do that. But so I do have Clash of Empires. But it's also very personal. I don't necessarily travel over in the course of the fiction from multiple areas of the empire. It mostly takes place in one geographical zone. Enemies may threaten from afar, but so it's not I mean, it's not as complicated and multi-stranded as Tolkien or somebody like that. But
Sure. Well, where can we find you online to learn more?
My website is judithstarkston.com. Super easy to find. I have all kinds of historical background is one strand that you can find there. Also, what's new with my writing. I have a newsletter sign up, and I encourage that because it's lots of fun. I give you a free short story, and though you will not see it mentioned right there because I'm selling fiction, so I sell a short story. I mean, I give a short story as free. You also get, in the sequence of emails that you get when you sign up, a cookbook, because I'm really serious about my Bronze Age accurate world. And I'm also a chef, and I love to construct. It's true, I often have to use like DNA profiles of the ingredients around a hearth and things like that to construct my authentic food. But so I have a cookbook of foods that are mentioned in included in my fiction. I did it in conjunction with a woman who is a really knowledgeable historian of ancient Near Eastern food. So it's really fun. So you get that. So there's lots of reasons, fiction and food, to sign up for my newsletter.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us here on the Games and Writers Show. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. It was a very enjoyable interview.
Awesome. I'll talk to you again.
All right, great. Thanks so much.